Welcome to the Inspiration North podcast, inspiring stories from inspirational people and how they found their passion, their true north. I'm James Eves.
And I'm Michelle Minikin, and this is the Inspiration North podcast.
Today's episode, you don't have to be trapped in something you're unhappy in. With Fiona Setch, we talk about her work in an AIDS hospice, how she found a company that wanted to buy her enthusiasm, and how she's been going for 18 years without a business plan.
Fiona is a passionate Geordie woman whose motto for life is Carpe Diem, seize your day. After her first career in nursing, which she loved, nursing people who were dying made her realise exactly what she wanted to do in her life. So in 1993, she retrained in teaching adults and moved into learning and development. For the past 18 years, she has been running her own training and coaching business. She is passionate about helping people enjoy life and especially their working lives. She does this through coaching, consulting, and designing inspiring training which she enjoys delivering.
So it's another gloriously sunny day, isn't it? It's February, it is wildly windy, so you might even hear it on the mics as the gale force winds are blowing. And Fiona has joined us. And our first question, Fiona, is going back to school days. Did you have any idea what you wanted to be when you left school?
Hello. I wasn't really given any career advice when I was at school, other than, oh, you're tall, you'd make a good policewoman, which was not on my radar at all. My mum was a teacher. So I knew I didn't want to be a teacher, but I actually liked helping people learn. I think I wanted to be in between a journalist and actress and helping people learn. I think from quite an early age, I had a philosophy of life, although I didn't know that's what it was then, which is whenever anything goes wrong, what can you learn from it? So I was really good at helping my friends think about, you know, relationships ended, well, what might you like in the next one? Or and if anybody wasn't doing very well at school, how I could help them. So I think from a very early age, that was the way that I was developing. Although I didn't see it as development then.
So what did you do next?
Well, I didn't do very well with my GCSEs or my A-levels. I scraped through. And I was waiting at part-time jobs at a steakhouse. I lived in Prudhoe, which is in the Tyneside Valley, in between Newcastle and Hexham. And one of my best friend at the time, Lucy, we thought we might like to go and be au pairs in Italy. And there was, in the Evening Chronicle, there was an advert looking for an au pair in Milan. So we both got jobs and went on the overnight bus to London and then flew out to Milan and were nannies there for a year. And while I was nannying, I thought about what did I want to do next and applied to do nursing and came back and got a place at Freeman School of Nursing to do my nurse training. And that came from my grandparents, who I lived with for a while. My grandpa had Parkinson's disease and my granny looked after him. And she always wanted to be a nurse, but she wasn't able to be a nurse because her dad died when she was quite young and she had to be a secretary. So a combination of what she talked about wanting to be and being around my grandpa being ill and her looking after him, I thought, oh, why don't I have a go at being a nurse? And then did my nurse training and really, really enjoyed it. It was the old apprentice model before Degrees for Nursing came out. So I was based between Freeman, the RVI and the General, and qualified in 1985 and worked in Burns Nursing in Newcastle. And then I'd been qualified about a year and I saw an advert. It was a really rainy day in Newcastle, about November time, and there was an advert for looking for Burns nurses who'd been qualified at least 18 months in Saudi Arabia. So I got a job there with another friend who was a Burns nurse. We went to Saudi Arabia and I was there for a year, where I learnt to scuba dive. And one of my passions was swimming, and being a mermaid. So I was able to to actually actualise that by learning to scuba dive. So I had a great time working in Saudi Arabia and came back to Newcastle. It was at the time when HIV and AIDS was just around, and then I was quite shocked by people that were in the hospitals in the northeast were very scared about HIV and AIDS, and I didn't really understand it myself. So I decided I wanted to go and do a course to find out more about it. I knew that they were quite, again, I didn't realise it at the time, but quite homophobic about, people deserving to die. And it was really, at that time, it was gay men. And I'm thinking, hang on a minute, you could be talking about my friends here. But I didn't know what to say. So I went and did a course in London for 6 months, which turned into 8 years. And I worked in London, which I've loved all the jobs I've ever done. I think the time I had in London was particularly special.
I imagine meeting people, as it was caring for those who were either at stage of diagnosis of HIV or if it developed into the condition, were there any key points that you'd, I suppose, learned from speaking to such people who are quite unsure about the future? There's a lot of a backlash against them.
I think one of the things that was different about HIV compared to other illnesses, when I trained in Newcastle, healthcare was quite regimented, and a ward sister would have certain things that you had to do when you were on a ward. So I remember getting into terrible trouble because I had dared to tell a patient that their loved one had died rather than taking them into sister's office where she would tell them. Which, when the relatives came in and saw the empty bed, it didn't seem sensible to me to, pretend that I didn't know what had happened when I'd had a relationship with them. So, been looking after their loved one. In London, I mean, it was several years later, but everybody knew at the AIDS hospitals and the AIDS Hospice where I worked, London Lighthouse, that they had HIV or AIDS, and there was a much more honest, open communication, and a lot of people were the same age as me or slightly older, and they knew a lot more about the illness than I did, than healthcare professionals did. So that was quite challenging, and it was just a very different clinical environment, which was very, very enjoyable. Very sad. It was very hard. I mean, I've had friends as well that were living with HIV and died, so I've carried coffins, led funeral services, as well as working, caring for people.
Okay. And so I was quite young at the time, I think, but I'm trying to say really badly. So looking at the coronavirus now, and everyone just being a little bit uptight about it, but it was almost full blown hysteria around the sort of AIDS and HIV, and it must have been really sort of almost shaming for those who were suffering and their families too, because it was just the newspapers were splashed with it.
Well, I would come home and I'd be out with friends, and I might bump into somebody I hadn't seen for a while who'd ask me what I was doing and look, and would say things like, well, what do you want to do that for when you could be looking after children, or you want to do such and such? And I spent a lot of time arguing when what I learned from when I'd been in London and studied some courses and had a bit more experience was, you can't, if people are afraid of something, arguing with them doesn't help them. What you have to do is listen to their fears and then unpack them one by one and help them understand why it's not true, or why there are options, so that they can see that themselves. But if you just argue with them, then they just get more angry and afraid. But yes, I mean, it was at the time when there were the iceberg adverts and the tombstones were falling, and there was a lot of prejudice.
Yeah.
And I suppose it was lack of education, wasn't it? I mean, I remember, whether it be the tabloids, there'd be storylines, they'd run in things like EastEnders, and it was almost, I think, due to a lack of understanding. It wasn't from shaking someone's hand or being in the swimming pool with somebody that had HIV that it was a problem. And I think that's often what fear is about, isn't it? You don't have a full grasp of what's really going on.
Well, healthcare professionals didn't at the start. You know, the Terence Higgins Trust was started off because Terence Higgins was one of the first men who died from HIV, and he was nursed on a mattress on the floor in a hospital in London, and people put food on a tray underneath a door. They were so worried about it because they didn't understand it. You know, it was this disease that had come from America, and it wasn't until they understood more about it that people were able to, healthcare professionals. I mean, it is when you see. I'm trying not to watch a lot of it on the news at the moment because it is really. If you look at what's happening in China, and how, you know, it must be very, very difficult to be working in those conditions. I think a turning point was when I realised I was nursing a man who was in his 40s who'd been a ballet dancer, and he was talking about death. And I've always been very comfortable talking about death and dying and just being alongside somebody. And he was saying that he felt like he was in the wings, waiting for the biggest performance of his life, waiting to die. And one of the things that I realised was not everybody was as comfortable sitting talking, and I just felt quite at peace. So, and it also made me realise why. I think I wanted to help. I want to help people enjoy whatever it is they're doing in life, which kind of goes back to at school, helping people with learning from things, I think. And it made me realise I didn't have to carry on being a nurse. I could think about doing something else. I could help me be brave, help me be courageous, because people that are dying are having to do those things, are having to make choices. And I think it makes you realise, actually, everything's okay.
Was that obviously, it sounds like it's something that spurred you on to try something different. I wonder if that would have happened if, say, you'd been working and caring for other types of patients who are, if it's in a burns unit or something where you're not face to face with someone's dying days. I don't know, would you say that's fair to say?
I think I've always had a really holistic way of caring for people. I can think of a favourite. Not that you're supposed to have favourite patients, but my favourite patient when I was working on the burns unit was an elderly lady who'd been literally lifted out of her flat because it had blown up, and she survived, and I was there as a student nurse, and she'd been a nurse, she'd been a district nurse, and you know she had lots of stories about how it was when she was a nurse, and she was probably about in her late 70s. And it was fascinating. I've always been very curious, and I love listening to people and hearing their stories, which really is what I do now as a coach, listening to people, having rapport with them, and exploring with them what their stories are. And I think that's what I enjoyed nursing people at the end of their life, because they like to talk about what's important in their lives, and I think that helped me be able to do the same thing with mine. So I got the opportunity to change career, and I moved into the Learning and Development Department at London Lighthouse. We did a lot of teaching, and retrained in teaching adults and facilitation skills. Then I met my husband on a Greek holiday in an island called Skiros, one of the first holistic holidays companies, and moved back to the northeast after leaving London and going travelling for a while, mainly visiting friends that had emigrated to Australia, New Zealand and Canada. It was nice to go and see where I used to send cards and letters to see their addresses. And we moved back to the northeast. He wasn't from the northeast, he was from Chesterfield. He moved to London because I'd just changed jobs into learning and development, and I knew when I was at London Lighthouse that it was a kind of a moment in time. It was a really special place to work, a really special organisation, and he was vetting, and I thought, at later stages in our lives I'll be moving around with his career. So he moved to London, and then we moved to Newcastle, and I worked for Marie Curie Cancer Care in the hospice in Elsick, doing staff development. and trained as a coach. And then after 5 years, they had an organisational restructure, which I'd been part of, actually. I'd been part of the auditing of services, and we used to do national work at their head office in London as well as at the hospice in Newcastle. And my manager sat me down and said, well, there's the result of the exploration of learning and development, and we're going to have a new post. I was like, oh, champion, somebody else to work with. No, we're making your post redundant, and it'll be a regional post. And I had no desire to travel between Liverpool, Bradford and Newcastle. So I literally went home, and there was a message on the answering machine from someone that I had spoken to about 6 months previously, who wanted me to develop some presentation skills training. Somebody's wife had been on one of my courses at Marie Curie, and she'd come back after maternity leave, and my presentation skills course had empowered her to feel more confident. And he'd remembered that, so he contacted me then, and I said no, I wasn't in a position to work for them, but actually it was tradecraft. But I was actually, so I gave him lots of information about the course and the resources I used. And then the afternoon, I remember I went home, it was really strange. There was a message saying, we're just about to go live with the project and would really like you to be part of it. So I went out for lunch, and it was a national project. They had people that worked for them up and down the country. So there was training in Newcastle, I think Birmingham and London. So I thought, well, perhaps I could do this for myself. So I set up my business, and then lots of people started asking me to do work. So I never planned it. It just evolved.
Accidental entrepreneur.
Yes. I didn't have a business plan.
That was a guilty look from us too, wasn't it? Business plan.
Yes.
Sometimes just a good idea in someone who's interested in it. And
yes.
Let's go.
Actually, what he said was, he asked me what was different about why, because I told him what had happened. They were making the organisation, they made my job redundant. And he said, well, why do you not want to do that role? I said, well, on my CV, it's probably the thing to do, but actually, I'd have to buy in other people to do what I love doing. And he said, well, that's why we want to buy your enthusiasm. I thought, okay.
Interesting.
Good, isn't it? Yeah.
Never looked back.
No. So when was that?
That was 18 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, 18 years
Still
ago.
no business plan?
Still no business plan. Although I've had a coach supervisor for 18 years. And off and on the same person. And every year I review my goals and set some new goals. So I haven't got an actual business plan, but I have got goals.
It's not the formal, it's like a 40-page thing.
No, but I never had to. Yeah. I suppose the sort of business I've got, though, I have an office at home and I do work, wherever I lay my hat to my home, really. I've got a mobile office in my car. So I work one day a week at St Oswald's Hospice doing coaching and training across the clinical services there, and I work at Northumberland Hospice. And because of my nursing background, I've done a lot of work in healthcare organisations, but I've also worked in small businesses, and I help people with interview skills. So that can vary from somebody who's applying to join the Marines, preparing them for commando training, which is very interesting. Or it can be someone who's facing redundancy or maternity leave or retirement. I help people at all stages of their career. So I find it absolutely fascinating, and I just love it.
What's a typical person? So anything from Royal Marine Commando to I need to come back after having a baby.
Yes, or my organisation's having a big restructure. I'm not sure if I want to fit in. I've always wanted to do this, so I'd do some transition coaching. What are your strengths? Get them to do some vision boarding. What would you like to do?
We bought some boards for vision boarding, but we've ended up repurposing them for other stuff. Yeah, we were supposed to be doing that about 6 months ago. Yeah,
we'll get there.
We will. They're just like dotted around now with stuff on them in here. Crackers.
Well, I sometimes use vision boarding when I'm doing, so I do training as well. I've just run a course for North East Hospice Collaborative across hospices across the North East, an emerging leaders course. And on the last day of the course, everyone created a vision board of their leadership journey. I had asked everybody for a favourite track of music and put together a playlist. And so to that everybody was creating their vision board. And some people give you strange looks when you give them a pile of collagey things to do, but once they settle into it, they really get into it. And it's and I've had a few emails saying it's in my office or it's at home and it's helping me focus on the goals that I set. So it's just a visual way of reminding yourself what it is that you want to do.
I think as well the retirement angle is quite an interesting one, because there's often the image of retirement is freedom, finally finished working.
Here's the grandkids. See ya.
Yes. But there's not always, I think it can be quite a difficult transition in life to where you've had, whether or not you enjoyed the career, I suppose, is a different matter, but actually reaching a point where you no longer have anything specifically necessarily to get up for, unless you've got other projects. You're going to, I don't know, U3A meetings or painting classes, or you're learning Spanish or
countryside rangering.
Yeah.
Digging up dead Romans like my dad does. Archaeology is not just,
Is it something people actually give much thought to?
I think everybody's different. So some people are giving thought. I mean, I'm 58 this year. Can't believe that, but I'm 58 this year. So, and I have no desire to retire at all, because I'm in flow. I love what I do. It doesn't feel like work. But some people, I did jury service when my son Jamie, who's 15, he must have been about 3, and I always wanted to do jury service until I got called up, and I was self-employed, because I thought, what if I get a really awful case that takes weeks and weeks and weeks? But that didn't happen. But I was in the jury holding area, and I got chatting to a lady, and she said, what are you doing, if you don't mind me asking? Because I had all sorts of things to do and read, because you had to sit until you were called. So I told her what I did. I have a coaching and training business. And she says, oh, that sounds really interesting. I said, it is, I love it. What do you do? Well, I work for the ministry. I said, oh, do you? That's it's not interesting. I said, oh. She said, I've been doing it for 35 years, 6 months and 4 days. I said, have you? She said, and I hate it. I said, all right. Have you ever wanted to do anything else? Oh, she says, I'm retiring in 6 years, 8 months, 3 weeks and 2 days.
Crikey. And
I said, I was a bit taken aback, and I said to her a few days later, I told her that I'd had a career in palliative care nursing. I said, I never met a person as they were dying who said, I wish I'd stayed in that job for 6 years, 4 months, And actually, it's a long time. There are so many people who'd like to live in their 6 years. So on the last day, I was going down in the lift before we got released, because my cases had finished. She got on the lift and she said, oh, I'm really glad I've seen you. She said, because one of the things I asked her was, if you could do anything, what would you like to do? She said, well, actually, I'd really like to have a dog walking business. Well, why don't you? She said, well, they were trying to make me redundant. I said, champion. I said, I was made redundant. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. But she didn't want to, because she had obviously only had 6 years to work before she could retire in this job she hated. But she had decided she was going to look into it. And unfortunately, I didn't take her number or email, because I'd love to know if she did do that.
But they're almost like Google dog walking businesses in Newcastle, we track it down.
Yes. But I think, I know that there are a lot of people who have to do what they're doing because they perhaps aren't trained to do anything else, and that must be a very difficult position to be in. But there are so many different ways that you can learn to do different things, that you don't have to be trapped in something that you're so unhappy in, because life is too short.
Yep. I think we don't learn that lesson until much too late in life, I think, generally, do we?
No, because you brought up with a kind of a what career do you want when you're older, and it's great you've done all the right lessons and courses to become an accountant or a bricklayer or a dentist or whatever it might be, and it's almost there's nothing there to really say you'll actually get into something. You think you want to do this now at 8 years old, but you might reach a point eventually where actually your passion is something else, and it's totally fine to change direction, but you just have to figure out a way, don't you, to do that. Whether it's for this lady at the ministry, it could be over a year. You learn something else. You go to courses on the weekend, on an evening, and you gradually move in that direction. But I don't know, it's strange, isn't it?
Yeah. I think we have so many options now compared to, say, when I was at school.
Yeah.
And I think for some people that's fantastic if you're the sort of person who's willing to give it a go. But if you're the sort of person who likes to tick a box and only do something if it's not feeling very confident, that's why it's great to have a coach. So, what I'll do is I'll help people explore what it is they want to do. And sometimes it's actually, I'm really happy where I am, and that's fine. But often it's, I'd like to do something different. So I'll help them look at what the options are. A bit like going fishing. So if you fish with one rod, you cast it and you probably only catch a fish. But if you put a net in the water, you might drag out an old boot or, a tin can as well as some fish. And it's about looking at what it is. And there might be something in there that's a real pearl that you could then pursue.
No, it is. It's interesting stuff. And it's almost... coaching still in this country is still a bit almost taboo for some people. You wouldn't expect an athlete not to have one, or a footballer not to have one,
or it's seen as something for the wealthy, the famous
CEOs,
sports.
But really, we should all have a coach.
Well, clearly I would say that because I have a coaching business, yes. But it's but yes, and if you look at some sport, so if you look at Sir Clive Woodward, how when England won the Rugby World Cup in 2003, he changed the face of rugby by looking at the model that they used in American football, and he brought in an eye coach, a kick coach, a psychological coach, as well as and got the players to have what they call the little black book of rules, which they came up with. They decided that they were going to be at every meeting 10 minutes early, I think. So. He didn't instill the discipline. He didn't tell them what they needed to do. He empowered them, and as a team they decided, which was a different way of working, I think. And I think that's what coaches do. Yeah. Don't we?
We do. I really struggle with the coach mentor thing.
Yes.
So I would say I was more mentor. I work mostly with business psychologists as well. So it's in that. I've walked in their shoes, I suppose. So it's more mentoring. So I can't. I'd actually like to get your opinion on this, but I really struggle to sit there. It's like the obvious is, the answer is really freaking obvious.
Well, I think if you were to,
sometimes it's like
if you were to draw circles, like the old what's it called?
What you can control or influence?
No. If you draw concentric circles and there's an overlap.
The Venn diagram.
That's the one, a Venn diagram, thank you, yes. There'd be an overlap between coaching, mentoring and supervision.
And training.
Yes, and training. And depending on what your professional background is, or your work background, then and what your experience is. I think I like using a coaching approach I think I use a coaching approach in everything that I do, really. And I can't help it. It just oozes out of me with enthusiasm.
Yeah, so I literally give people homework, no matter who I talk to. It's more that kind of, read this or listen to this or watch this. Yes. This will help sort of push you in the right direction.
Yes.
So it's so you can't help it. I can't help giving people homework.
So people will ask you your opinion, and I'll say, and what do you think your options could be?
And I'll be like, just read that. It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, it's because I'm the oldest of 4 children and all grandchildren. Really, I'm not bossy. I'm the boss. Is that it?
But I think we're in a fantastic time because we have, technology gives us so many gifts. So the podcast, what we're doing now, to think that anybody in anywhere can listen to it
Forever.
It's just amazing, isn't it? And I'm discovering lots and lots of different podcasts. And so, I'm thinking this weekend I was cooking, listening to Gregory Porter, The Hang, where he was interviewing Jeff Goldblum and Jamie Cullum, and it's just fantastic. But being able to choose at whatever time you want to listen to something and just click into it and, click into your website and listen to your Inspirational North podcast. It's brilliant.
It is. It's almost like it can get overwhelming as well.
Yes.
It's almost like, where do I start?
Yes.
So
I felt like that the first time somebody told me, a friend, Richard Nugent, told me about TED Talks.
Oh gosh.
I'd never, and I said, what? And
Weeks of my life gone.
And he said, Fiona, beware. He said, this could take weeks of your life. But yeah, it's like, it's amazing how much there is. And actually, it's the spirit of generosity that we all have around sharing. Stephen Covey would call it the abundance mentality rather than the scarcity mentality.
Yeah.
Scarcity mentality, I'll keep everything for myself, and abundance mentality is like you're interviewing people and sharing it.
No, so it's that growth mindset stuff as well.
Yeah.
Love it. So do you have a favourite TED Talk?
Benjamin Zander, have you heard of him?
I know the name.
He's the conductor of the Boston Philharmonic Orchestra, and he has a film that I saw when I was working at Marie Curie at a leadership seminar at Freeman Hospital, and he has this amazing talk. He travels around the world. He's 80. He travels around the world doing leadership seminars, and he uses the metaphor of the orchestra and the conductor of the orchestra in teamwork. And his TED Talk is about making everybody like classical music. It's fantastic, and he's really inspiring. He's got quite an eccentric, enthusiastic way of delivering it, and he's just fantastic. And he talks about making, rather than having the success game of I have to be more successful, waking up in the morning and saying, right, I'm a contribution, what am I going to make today? And when I heard that, I thought, that's just what I do.
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm making a contribution. So why I love working at St Oswald's Hospice and Northumberland Hospice, doing coaching and supervision with the staff, is because I'm making a difference to patients still, and that's one of the things that I always wanted to do. When I moved from nursing into training and coaching, I wanted to still be making a difference to patient care. So if I pick up anything and I read about patient care in any of the places that I've been involved in, it really gives me a buzz, because I can think I've been a part of that.
That's fantastic.
So are there any other passions that you like to get involved with?
Yes, I really enjoy writing. I'm published in, I've had a chapter in a palliative care textbook about looking after yourself published, and some articles in hospital doctor newspapers, and also one which I'm very proud of, which was in Coaching at Work, which was about how my previous clinical experience had made an impact on my ability to coach. So I was talking about being alongside people as they were dying, and how, because when you're coaching, you're actually with people, holding their space and helping them to explore whatever it is that they're wanting to explore, which was quite similar to the being in the space when I was nursing. And I've also, because one of the things I love doing is helping people get the jobs that they want to, I was asked to write an ebook, invited, I should say, to write an ebook. So I wrote an ebook called The Art of Interview Skills, and that's published with Bookboon, and that was in 2014, and there have been 323 or 325,000 downloads since then. And so I'm going to I'm going to rewrite that as a book. I've got a list of things that I want to write, actually. And also one of my passions, which I didn't say, was when we moved back to the northeast. I called myself a born-again Geordie, and I absolutely love being in the northeast. I love everything about it. I love showing people around when they come to visit. I was a volunteer at Alnwick Gardens for a while.
Oh, wow.
And that was fabulous. But I was a bit lonely after I started working for myself. I missed being part of an organisation. So that was before I was working at St Oswald's one day a week. And I used to drive sort of a round trip of 70 miles to volunteer to be part of an organisation. But I did enjoy the area that I was volunteering there, showing people around the garden.
Yes, we need to take James broomstick training at the castle.
Right.
He's not done that yet, so...
There was a lady that I saw at the gardens who was sitting, looking longingly at the water, at the fountains. And I went and sat next to her, and her granddaughter was working in Alnwick, and she dropped her off for the day. And I said to her, well, I would love to show you around. And she said, well, I can't walk very far. I said, well, I'll tell you what about if I've got to get a wheelchair? So I pushed her around the gardens, and we sat down. It was a lovely day. We sat down and we got chatting, and she asked me how old I was. So I told her I must have been about 51 at the time. And she said, oh my dear, if I'd known you were that age, I never would have got you to push me around the gardens. And I said, I'd had her over the wibbly wobbly bridge and everything, you know. And I said, oh, you've been a great workout today. And we had lunch together, and she wrote a lovely letter to the gardens, actually, saying what a lovely day she'd had. So that was really lovely.
That's great. So this is our new, not yet named, quick fire question round.
Right.
That we thought would be fun to introduce at Christmas. We've been doing it since then, haven't we?
Okay.
We have, yes.
So, are you going to ask the first question, James?
I can do. If you could have a ticket to travel anywhere in the world, where would it be?
I would like to go back to the Maldives to go scuba diving, snorkeling and scuba diving with Q, my husband, and Jamie, my son. And I probably would want to be with the manta rays. We have manta rays. We saw a manta ray in Sharm el-Sheikh. And that's an interesting story, actually, because it was the last day of the holidays, and my husband's a really keen photographer. And I said, oh, don't bother taking the cameras. We won't see anything we haven't seen before. We went out in the water snorkeling, and we saw a stonefish, and we were sort of diving down to see that. And then out of the corner of it, we saw this big manta ray, and we followed it like the anthill mob. And afterwards, my husband was like, well, I could have got some great photographs. And Jamie said, but Dad, if you'd had your camera, we never would have seen the manta ray because you would have been photographing the stonefish. Which was amazing, because actually sometimes you get so focused on one thing that it shuts you down. So we've all got a little manta ray, and we have manta ray moments, and I carry that around with me, and I often take it to training to encourage people to think and look around. And I think that's really applicable with mobile phones.
Oh gosh, yeah.
People look down all the time, and we need to look up more.
Yeah, definitely.
Totally agree.
So that was a very long answer to that question.
So my question is, if you could visit any date in history, what would it be?
Oh, I'd be greedy and want to visit a few.
List them, it's fine.
Do you know what I'd really love to do is, I'd love to cheer Queen Victoria up. Because she was so sad after Albert died.
Yes.
And she had so much. She did so much. I'd quite like to go... I'd love to have been on one of the boats going to America, to land in America.
Not the Titanic, though.
No, not the Titanic. No.
His face.
Boadicea. I'd love to have known Boadicea, or Boudica, as she was called. And one of the things that I'm going to get upset, one of the things I'd love to do is, when I was a student nurse, the last time I visited my granny in hospital, I didn't realise it, but she was dying, and I wish I'd known. So I'd love to go back and just be with her, because I left and she died about 12 hours later. And now, in hindsight, I wish I could go back and just be with her. So that would be a moment.
Lovely.
What's your favourite smell?
Favourite smell? I'm trying to think. I love the smell of bluebells. I love bluebell woods. I don't like the smell of seaweed because it kind of gets me out. But I do because I love the sea.
Yeah.
But I think my favourite smell would be the smell that you have. You don't really have a smell when you're underwater, but just as you're going down when you're diving, you put the regulator over your mouth and you start breathing in the air, and there's a smell, which is sort of salty water and the equipment, and that's an amazing smell because I know that I'm about to be a mermaid again. And I'm about to be down, and just it's an amazing feeling. So so bluebells. And then I was thinking of food and
Okay, so I'm going back in time again. So if you could go back in time and have a wee chat with your 18-year-old self, what advice would you give her?
To seize the day, which I was doing. When I was 18, I was nannying in Italy, feeling like I had failed my A-levels. I hadn't done as well in them as I'd hoped, but actually it was just all about learning. And I think I would say to myself, enjoy the coffee and ice cream gelato, which I was doing very much, and the friendships that I was making, and carry on being enthusiastic, because it's a great thing to be, and play and enjoy. All the things that you're going to do are going to be great, and enjoy them. I think that's being passionate about life and being enthusiastic about life is a gift, and a contribution, which it's like a ripple effect. It's a gift that just keeps on giving, and I think that's what my coaching does. That's what I do in my business. I help people have a ripple, and you never know where that's going to go.
That's true.
We say that about the Action for Happiness work that we do. You know, it's like you help one person discover happiness, and then they'll spread that.
Yes.
So it's interesting that the impact that one enthusiastic, I'd like to say weirdo, because that's, people sometimes look at me like, what on earth is she on?
Joy.
And people just sometimes just don't get it. I get into trouble all the time because I'm not particularly formal as a psychologist as well, and you can engage people so much better with that natural enthusiasm that you clearly have. But it's some people just don't get it as well, which is really sad as well, isn't it?
I think that says more about them.
Yeah.
Some people are afraid of a ripple because they like a circle that doesn't go anywhere.
I'm in my box, leave me alone.
Yes. But I think there's the potential for so much in life. And I think that's what really excites me, always has. And I love it. I love it when someone gets the job or chairs the meeting that they've been really worried about, or makes that first presentation. Yeah.
Brilliant.
So if that's resonated with our listeners, what's the best way to find you?
The best way to find me, I have a website, which, do I say it?
Yes, please.
www.fionasetch.co.uk, and you can find me on the life coaching directory.
Brilliant. Well, thank you ever so much for coming.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
This glorious but really, really windy day. Mary Poppins would not survive in this weather, I don't think. She'd be off to somewhere else.
Should be doing cartwheels out the window. We'll be just watching her go across the sky.
Awesome. Well, thank you ever so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for listening. Check out all the show notes at inspirationnorth.com. Join us again for the next episode, when we'll be chatting to another inspirational person. If you like this, subscribe and tell your friends. If you didn't like this, subscribe anyway.
And tell everybody.